From VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship, this is episode 11 of Circle of Willis, where I chat with psychophysiologist and neuroscientist Nicole Prause about the rewards and challenges of using science to study sex. Hey everyone, it's Jim Cohn, and this is my podcast, Circle of Willis. Or at least it was my podcast. We'll see how long it lasts after this episode is released into the wild. This might be it, folks. I might be crossing some kind of line here. I don't know, probably not. But the thing is, in this episode I'm talking with Nicole Prause, whose friends call her Nikki, about the science of sex. And you know what? Sex comes up. A lot. Nikki Prause is an expert psychophysiologist and neuroscientist. She trained, among other places, at the Kinsey Institute for Research in Sex, Gender, and Reproduction at Indiana University. She's an associate research scientist at UCLA and a licensed clinical psychologist. And recently she founded Liberos, LLC, which is her very own private research institute and biotech company. There's a lot of complex reasons for that we're going to talk about. But anyway, we're all mature adults, right? We've all had sex ed. Well, many of us have. But the thing is, we still have a pretty hard time talking about sex, you know, as a community, as a culture, as a society. And you might think that scientists, you know, who at the very least can make the topic kind of clinical and sterile with all their jargon, would be especially above it all. That there wouldn't be anything particularly controversial about applying the scientific method to what is, after all, a huge aspect of human behavior and physiology, our sexual responses. And, well, if you thought that, you'd be kind of wrong. Sex just makes people feel uncomfortable. Seems like whenever it comes up, there's always some kind of unspoken or compulsory acknowledgement that all involved in the conversation may have at times actually done it. Sex, I mean. They may have engaged in sex, and that's pretty private stuff. I don't like to talk about that if I don't have to. And so we avoid it. Or at the extreme, we sort of silence it, not only avoiding it ourselves, but also demanding that others avoid it too. Weird thing is, I kind of understand that. So, for example, in the family I grew up in, there were certain words that one simply did not say. And I'm not talking about the F-bomb here. I'm talking about the words penis and vagina. Those were words, you know. But anyway, look, I've come a long way. I'm pretty confident, for example, that my daughters don't regard those words, penis and vagina, as either mysterious or controversial. It's taken some effort, I won't lie, but I have committed to helping them grow up in a world where simply speaking the words penis and vagina is no cause for alarm. And it's been a challenge at times. It's been like I said, it's been effort. It's taken effort. Like when my daughter Lulu decided to educate everyone in the grocery checkout line about the fact that her daddy had a penis. That was hard for me. I mean, in the abstract, it's not really a problem, right? It's not controversial. Most of the people in that line, I would say the overwhelming majority even, would probably have correctly guessed that I have a penis. But at the same time, it's my preference to refrain from reminding people of that fact, at least while waiting in line to purchase my milk and eggs and Brussels sprouts or whatever. It's just, it isn't apropos the situation. Point is, people, it isn't easy for me to talk about genitals, really under any circumstances. That's really what I wanted to say. I'm not proud of that or even happy about it, but it is, as they say, what it is. In all seriousness, folks, the sex researchers face a lot of challenges, and in Nikki's case, those challenges have even left her fearing for her personal safety. She's been harassed for years by various individuals and groups with anti-sex axes to grind, and she's kept at it anyway because of a genuine passion for the work and a conviction that real scientific knowledge about sex and sexuality is good for everyone. So take a little time to get to know her here by listening to our conversation, which starts right now.
I'm getting so much trouble.
This is going to be tough. This is going to be tough because I'm going to... Will it offend you if I giggle constantly?
I will be giggling constantly.
I mean, help. One of the things when I teach abnormal psychology and I have to talk at some point, listen to even the way I say it, I have to talk about sexual dysfunction. And it freaks me out because it freaks them out. Right. And I'm sort of empathic to a fault sometimes. So I'm looking at these poor nervous undergraduates that are just like, nah.
Shared.
And I know, but I've sort of found that the way to deal with it is to go just all in. Mm-hmm. So I open up with a slide from this old radio show called Love Lines. Do you know about Love Lines?
With Drew?
Yeah.
He's still on. I got asked to be on a show with him 2 days ago, possibly.
Well, yeah, so somebody compiled a bunch of questions that were sent in there, and some of them were pretty, they're pretty risque. And so they giggle for 5 minutes or something, and then they get over it. So yeah, that's sort of what we're in for, talking with Nikki Prause. When did we first meet? Did we first meet at SPR? I was trying to remember that when I was flying out here. It was like a panel. I was on a panel. I remember you raised your hand.
Yeah, I'm the annoying person who every time you were on a reward panel is like, what about sex? What about sex? And you're like, shut up back there.
I remember that because I was sitting next to Eddie Harmon Jones, who's a character.
Indeed.
And I remember deferring to him. When you raised it, have you thought about this approach? I think it was because we were talking about approach and withdraw, and we were talking about the approach motivation stuff.
Yeah, they're having some trouble using dessert stimuli with kind of preferences.
So why not orgasm?
Yeah, that has pretty universal positive regard.
Yeah, and it's true. And, it must irritate you. I know it irritates you that it's not used more commonly. It irritates me. I did one of these interviews with David Barlow. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the Barlow strain gauge, which people may or may not know is what is it exactly?
It's a mechanical strain gauge that fits around the midshaft of the penis. It's an open C kind of, so it's metal, but it expands easily because it's not fully enclosed.
Right.
And it just has a simple basic strain gauge on one side of it. We have built them and used them in my research, but they're not very common these days.
So, if we were using sort of sexual response to look at approach motivation, to look at positive reward responding and stuff like that, not only do we have a nice concrete measure of response to potential rewards, but we know what it means.
We have high specificity.
High specificity.
Yes. There are lots of great things, I think, about sex models that, it's not the answer for everything, obviously, but if you're studying primary rewards, what the hell are you doing with desserts? Get rid of the brownies, strap a vibrator on them, and let's talk about primary rewards. Seriously.
Yeah, I'll you know what? I'm going to just write that to my IRB. I was going to say, we're getting rid of the brownies and we're strapping a vibrator on them. Mm-hmm. But you can't really do that, right? You can't really just do that.
We did it.
How? I mean, you let's get there. Let's back up a little bit because I need more context.
Yes.
So when was that? We first met at SPR. It was like 2002 or 2003 or something, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. Where were you at that time? What were you doing?
I think I was late stage graduate school, maybe, or early faculty. So
where did you go to grad school?
I was Indiana University, so I was studying there with the Kinsey Institute.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Hiding out there in Indiana.
And did you do work in the Kinsey Institute right away?
Pretty soon after I got there, I was an undergraduate and I was their lab coordinator for years and then transitioned to graduate student. So I was in the lab, their psychophys lab, like 7 or 8 years.
As an undergraduate?
Straight through grad school.
You from Indiana?
No, hell no. I followed a boy up there.
You followed a boy, dumbass.
Yep. But look what I got.
Look what you got. You got a whole career.
Lost the boy, got a career. Done.
Yeah, it was a fair trade.
I think so.
Where'd you come from?
Texas.
Oh, that's right. I did know
Yeehaw.
that. Yeah. Where in Texas?
Southeast, a little town called Beaumont.
Beaumont, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Noted for its openness about sexuality and sexual
Difficulty
behavior.
purchasing condoms and hearing what sex is. That also, yes.
Yeah. What was it? What was it like growing up there? What were your parents doing? What did they do?
Dad was a pediatrician, which was a good thing because there were 6 kids in the family.
Holy shit!
And indeed, 5 girls, all causing trouble. So,
where were you? Were you like the number one or the
alpha?
You're the
alpha
You're
female,
the oldest.
Oldest, absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm one of those too.
My bossing
I
failed
understand.
miserably.
Yeah, always.
Why don't they just listen to
They
us?
don't, because they're little assholes. That's why.
I didn't say it. Just for the record, that was Dr. Cohen.
So you're in Beaumont. Your dad's a pediatrician. What's your mom doing?
She's hanging out at home doing the child raising
thing.
Yeah.
Thing.
Trying to keep me from talking to him too much about this stuff. So.
Were you weird early on?
Yes.
Yeah? How were you weird?
I think it was, most kids worry a lot about fitting in and being normal and not standing out. And I abhorred that. I hated the idea that I would be like anybody else, and was happy to, I used to wear neckties to school. I have no idea where that came from.
You're doing like an Annie Hall kind of thing.
Dyeing my hair purple and, generally, I was a good student. It wasn't rebelled in that way, but just did not want to be normal. Had no interest in it.
See, in my experience, teachers love that. Teachers love the kid who does well in school, but is also, sort of bucks convention.
But not too much.
Not too much, maybe.
Yeah.
This is Beaumont.
Within range.
Did you get along with your teachers okay?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a school that was very low socioeconomic. We have a lot of oil refineries in town, so people are working factory-type jobs.
Wow.
I was actually the ethnic minority in town, so it was kind of an unusual place to grow up. It was I've heard, the last city to integrate.
Wow.
The schools. So just a very checkered past.
Is it close to the coast? It must be.
Yeah, pretty much. Close to Galveston and Louisiana, so that whole area.
Yeah, and so you met a boy
in college.
So did you go to Indiana right away?
No. So I started out a little school in San Antonio where I met him. He was older, so he went for graduate school before I did. For music up in Indiana, where music is quite good. And
it is?
It's excellent.
The department.
Often ranked only behind Juilliard. Yep.
You're kidding.
Very good.
I don't know anything.
I would not have guessed Indiana, and yet they have amazing opera, amazing chamber music, just things you would never have imagined in the middle of the Midwest.
And the Kinsey Institute. We're a bunch of weirdos up there. So you liked Indiana?
I loved it. If it had been warmer, I would have stayed.
Well, that's the thing. I don't really, it makes sense to me now that you're in Los Angeles studying sex because, why? Because people have sex in Los Angeles. They don't have sex, the further east you go, and especially northeast, people don't have sex. They sort of huddle together grimly in corners and sip cold coffee.
That is not true.
It is true.
That is not true.
Wow.
It's a larger population here, so whatever you're interested in studying, you can find it. If you want to study men who have sex with men, it's hard to do in Bloomington. Of course, they're there.
They're there.
But it's a very small group, less visible, harder to recruit. Similar kinds of things for sexual risk behavior. Of course, there are people in Bloomington, Indiana getting in all kinds of trouble, but there are such a large group of them in large cities, including Los Angeles. This is the place to be.
Yeah. Access.
Totally.
So why is Kinsey in Indiana? That's just where he was from, or what?
Alfred Kinsey was a zoologist at Indiana University for many years before he started studying sexual behaviors. So his institute kind of grew out of
transformed.
That. Indeed, and ended up with a lot of sociologists in it, and now has gotten very, very tiny, and there's some question about lack of funding and lots of political attacks that are pretty direct on their existence.
And this becomes a theme for you for your whole career.
Yep.
Okay, well, I want to get there. But so you start working at Kinsey as an undergraduate.
Yeah, I think I did a semester as a research assistant and then just loved it. Was there hanging out for fun, reading articles for no reason, just nerding out on sex.
Nerding out on sex.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Because what kind of research were you working on at that time?
The very first trial I was involved with was measuring vaginal responses in postmenopausal women. They were taking a drug that they thought might have negative sexual effects or positive sexual effects, and just wanted to understand more about that.
It's super important.
It was first thing in the door. I mean, sexual effects are still the number one reason people discontinue antidepressant medications. And yet we know jack about how to address those problems. We just take them off the pill and keep swapping them on other pills. Well, this is kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, that's what comes up in the abnormal class that I teach in undergraduates, is that sexual issues, whether it's sort of understanding normal sex and how people enjoy it, or sexual dysfunctions, it's in surprising ways goes to the core of who we are. Our identity, our sort of reason for getting up in the morning. It's involved in so much of this stuff. It's amazing to me in some ways that we don't pay more attention to it.
Well, and yet, if you ask those abnormal psych students, I think many of them say, "Well, it's a nice to have." They don't see it as central.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
So
they're wrong.
Well, and so
they'll learn that more.
In fairness,
as they get older.
I've come to think in some ways they're right. So one of the errors and argument I think we've been making as a field is trying to say, gosh darn it, women deserve pleasure and we should have orgasms and all that stuff. Yeah. Like, that's nice. But if you can't feed your family, doesn't anybody care about how often you're having orgasms?
That's right.
So, if you want to argue for why do we need to know about this stuff, I think there are many other things that happen when your genitals are stimulated, when you're sexually aroused, whether it's the cognitive state or the biology of what's happening, that we can use in addressing general health issues. And I think we've been dumb as a field and trying to continue to beat our head against a brick wall, say orgasms are important. Some people are never going to care, and you're not going to convince them. But if I tell you orgasms do something similar to what an antidepressant medication does, and I can get you off your antidepressants, then now I've got your ear.
Yeah, well, that's good, and that's important. And it's not just, that doesn't sound to me like it's just PR. It's not. This is
real.
True.
Yeah,
real.
We can look at overlaps. And the other example in this domain is many people masturbate to help themselves fall asleep at night, and yet masturbation doesn't appear in any of the sleep assessments or the treatment manuals. So why don't we know anything about? Like, how should you, if you're going to try and do this, should you do it when you're lying in bed? Should you do it an hour before you're going to go to bed? Like, what is it about that seems to be facilitating sleep?
So it's not only the fact that masturbating before sleep can help you sleep. That's a finding? No,
this is the other thing. It's not a finding.
It's just that I see. So just people report that. People report that they do that.
Yeah, and so we all as human beings think we know this to be the case.
I see.
I'm guilty of having told magazines like, "Oh, yes, you can facilitate sleep." And then I went and actually looked for the science and I was like, "Oh,
no data.
Shit."
Dumbass.
Yeah, I was talking out of my ass on accident.
Oh my God.
And so now I try and correct myself, but it's
But maybe it does.
Presumably it does. You inject, rodents with a bunch of vasopressin that we know escalates when you have an orgasm. They start yawning like crazy and conk out.
Is that really true?
Yeah, they're adorable when they're yawning like that.
I bet they are. Yeah, little Disney cartoons.
They are. They really are.
Okay, so you're at Kinsey as an undergraduate. You're looking at vaginal response in postmenopausal women. Mm-hmm. Do you feel hooked to these kinds of questions right away?
Immediately.
Yeah.
And it did, honestly, early on, it was partly prurient interest. I mean, this is like, oh my God.
It's stimulating just to
I'm
think
looking
about
at the vagina and I'm screening porn for my studies.
You're
and
screening porn?
My advisor and I have to talk about whether or not to include anal and,
in the porn?
Yeah. And kind of like, why do we screen this kind of content out? And what do we think about letting people select for BDSM content? Or like those things when you're young are fascinating.
Oh my God. Well, it really is like the nuclear power of psychological responding and affective responding, isn't it?
High positive affect.
High positive, high arousal, right? That's that, if you look at the IAP slides, the International Affective Picture System. The only thing that they can find that gives both high positive affect and high arousal are sexually explicit images.
And that's with their bad porn. I got better stuff.
Just in case you
Not to brag, but to brag.
So you went to graduate school also in Indiana?
Stayed there.
You stayed there?
Yep.
And
Boy
who did you work
I
with?
Stayed. I had a funny dual advisorship. So I was actually in the clinical science program. So I was
you have a
working,
clinical degree?
Yep. Clinical
Nice.
science.
Me
And so Peter Finn, who does alcoholism research, was my first collaborator, does a lot of ERP work simultaneously with Eric Janssen, who was a scientist at the Kinsey Institute, and then ended up mainly actually working in a schizophrenia lab with Bill Hetrick.
Interesting.
So
lots of opportunity to learn different kinds of things.
Yeah, and his lab was doing really advanced processing for the time of like components analysis stuff that was novel for electroencephalography at the time. So I was doing a lot of methods learning in his laboratory, but then also picked up a bunch of attentional tasks and things that today are coming back around. I was like, oh,
Isn't that funny how that happens?
It does.
Becomes part of your
Pay
toolbox.
attention in class,
Pay attention,
kids.
right. Yeah, learn stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you're learning all of these techniques. And do you continue studying sexual responses and sexual responding in grad school?
I did the whole time. And I think in hindsight, that was a mistake. And I usually tell grad students this as well. I said, if you're going to study this stuff, go for it, but do it in the context of something else. It is a very risky career move in the US to be a sex researcher and to have that identity. So you will have a much easier time as a candidate and for moving forward in your career if you specialize in a different area and just add sex on as like an additional specialty.
It's so depressing to me somehow. I mean, I've been one way or another studying relationships since 1991.
Mm-hmm. I'm about to bully you. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, sex is one of the core elements. It's one of the absolutely core elements. And to this day, I still don't know much about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know much about it from
your poor wife.
I don't know much about it from the person. I mean, I don't know much about the literature, the scientific literature on it.
Yeah, you and I don't speak. This is a larger
absurd
field problem.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I also was a marital therapist and I taught couples therapy and did all that good stuff. And we have both had coding training for you much more in depth than I have about how to look at couples disagreements, but that's about where it stops.
Right.
And vice versa. That is the marital people, the couples people, and the sex people often aren't talking.
Yeah, it's a real problem. It's a real problem. And I've done marital therapy too. And I've worked with couples who are suffering from sexual dysfunctions of various kinds. And I sort of dig into some of the literature on that a little bit. But a lot of that, frankly, is Masters and Johnson. It still goes back for a long time ago.
So I have a bone to pick with your old advisor. So we just had a big marital researcher, Gottman, who said, sex therapy doesn't work. We've always known it doesn't work.
Oh, I didn't know he said that.
Yeah, it just came out like a few days ago. And there's still kind of this broad idea that, we don't know what we're doing. And there are some aspects of sex and sexual dysfunction where that's still the case. Sexual desire has been really difficult to get a handle on, to make progress with. But there are also some domains we kill it. So if you are treating someone who has pain disorder, you better know that literature.
Like vaginismus or something like that?
It's a dyspareunia broadly. So more commonly, like a vulvar vestibulitis is more common. But we have excellent treatments for sexual pain.
Yeah, no, that's the way I always understood it. The treatment for a lot of different kinds of sexual dysfunctions, I mean, it may be like second only to like primary anxiety problems in terms of treatment efficacy.
Yeah, some of the data are quite good.
Yeah, and they've been around for a long time, and people don't access them.
Well, it's funny
because they're ashamed.
That could be that, or like you mentioned, the Masters and Johnson. It's still like the most common sexual problem. Women report is still low desire problems. Now, culturally, that's shifted to where the women turn around and point the finger at the guys and say, no, your drive is too high. You're a sex addict. But that's a whole other issue.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, you guys don't know how to make us interested.
Oh,
it's a little bit of a different.
Yeah, that's the Bob problem. That's a different diagnosis. But like that is where a lot of people are still using sensate focus, that old Masters and Johnson stuff. And there is some data to support it, but not strong stuff. So that's one area we still have a lot of people expressing problems and not a lot to offer them, to be fair.
So people expressing problems in terms of like performance anxiety or something, because that's what I think of when I think of the Sensate Focus recommendation.
No. So honestly, like we've given up a lot of the erectile dysfunction to Viagra because there are data suggesting that Viagra has largely a psychologic mechanism, which is fascinating.
Viagra?
Yeah. In the sense that depending what studies you read, somewhere in the order of 40 to 70% of Viagra prescriptions are never refilled. They're picked up once.
That's interesting.
So, right, it could be these are just partiers. So they're picking them up for Sextasy to take with ecstasy for a party or something. That's possible. But that can't be that many of the prescriptions, could it? So the other kind of a big idea is that people get this Viagra or whatever Cialis they're using. They have some really positive sexual experiences and get their confidence back, and then they drop the pills.
Do it anymore.
Yep. So it was a psychologic mechanism, but using a biologic intervention.
Is that why like 20 or 30% of people who take Viagra they don't find it effective? I heard that statistic somewhere along the line.
That I don't know is the bottom line.
Yeah.
But, there are lots of things that
could be wrong, by the way.
Yeah, that could disrupt that cascade. So, I always say Viagra won't make her pretty. So if you don't have central activation, that is, if you don't see a competent sexual stimulus in front of you, Viagra will do nothing. You can take it and you don't just get an erection. You have to have your brain telling you, I see a sexual thing.
Right.
And if your brain won't tell you that, then the Viagra won't work.
I see. I didn't know that. Because you also hear about people who take Viagra and have the 5-hour erection and have to go to the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah, it's preventing the breakdown of something that allows the penile muscle to relax, but that means that has to be in the area of the penis to begin with. And how does it get there? You have sexual thoughts. So without the sexual thoughts, there's nothing there to prevent the breakdown for these, Cialis, Viagra, PDE5 inhibitor type medicines.
So back to graduate school, what are you where are you starting to focus on in terms of sexual questions, sexual psychophysiology? Is that what you think of what you do? You do psychophysiology of sex?
Yeah, I use the broader term. So sometimes I use neuroscientists, but I see that as
we've all
part of
gone
psychophys.
there.
Yeah, you want to be sexy, you got to be a neuro. Isn't it fascinating?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was doing all kinds of things to do with drive and coherence and sexual arousal, really basic science questions. So just
coherence being
the match between what people's physiology is doing and what they say they're feeling.
That's disrupted. So
yes.
people aren't good reporters of.
Yeah. So this is nothing new in emotion psychophysiology. This is the tripartite model of fear from ages ago, where it's Lang's work trying to understand when these systems agree or disagree. We have the same types of issues in sex, but we think we discovered it because we're little narcissists. So we pretend like we have to figure this out for the first time. But the truth is, like, it has a long history of trying to understand when people's experiences match what their bodies are doing and when they fail to match what their bodies are doing. And so one of the often repeated findings in our field is men's coherence is very high. That is, if they say they're sexually aroused, they have an erection.
They are.
And
maybe that's why I'm feeling confused right now, because I'm like, wait, but sex is so specific. I mean, how can you not know?
How could you not know? Well, in women, it's a lot more variable, we think.
And how does that manifest? So you can have...
Usually there's a body response. So you show women porn, and contrary to popular belief, women are also very visual. We don't have any reason to think that's different in women.
Really? They're as responsive to porn as men are?
If you control for the level of sexual desire, there is no gender difference.
What do you mean control? How do you control for the level of sexual desire?
There are a few ways. So most people use questionnaires. We have started using a neurological measure, but that's quite new.
Wow.
So if you basically...
So you ask them how interested in sex
like
they are?
traits, sexual desire.
Okay.
Yeah, day to day.
Okay,
how often do you want to have sex? How interested are you? How often are you thinking about it? Thinking about it with intention. Because I want to do something about it. I'm not just worrying about it.
Right.
And if you control for that, those gender differences go away largely. So I know.
Wow.
So we're doing all these things.
That couldn't be more different from the popular consciousness.
Men are not from Mars. We are from the same planet.
Yeah. Okay. So given that they're all equally responsive after you adjust for trait sexual interest, you nevertheless find that men are really good at tracking their own sexual arousal and women are not so good at it? Or what's the story?
We have all reported that finding many times, but there are lots of big question marks about it, because if women on average have lower sex drive, you have a stimulus matching problem. Are you really getting the women in the lab as aroused as you got the men in the lab? And because we have different genitalia, we can't equate the genital response very easily.
Because men, you can measure it more easily.
We can, well,
maybe that's the
we measure it
mischaracterization. Differently.
Yeah.
You
so
have
it's
the Barlow strain gauge.
There's this, yeah. And you can measure temperature on both the penis and the vulva, but are those equivalent structures?
Because of the blood flow into them?
Yeah, they both get
hotter. Because the vulva gets engorged too, right?
Engorged and hotter and all of these processes. But it's not clear when we show a stimulus, we have a hard time getting stimulus equivalents with these, or demonstrating that because of the different genitalia. So there's this question of, are we really getting the men and women equally cognitively aroused? So we've done work showing, like, if you get the women more aroused than usual, like if you show them weaker and stronger stimuli, the coherence does increase. And of course, there is the issue with the guys. Of course, all they have to do is look down and they know what we're measuring.
There's lots of visual feedback.
There's so many lines of feedback for them, and it's difficult to remove those. So even if you, like, there was a study where they hung a curtain across their lap back in the day, and you still, though, like, there's proprioceptive feedback. They can feel it's kind of on my leg.
It's not hard to know.
Yeah, I'm guessing, but it's difficult to remove that feedback to really test that hypothesis well.
Yeah. So was your dissertation on this sort of coherence question, or?
My dissertation was testing Barlow's model of sexual functioning.
Which part of it? The excitation transfer part, or the?
So I was trying to look at whether kind of emotional reactivity to sexual cues or attention to sexual cues better predicted reported sex drive. And of course, in hindsight, many problems with what I did, as we all have.
Yeah, that never happens with a dissertation,
right?
Ever.
So at the time, I found really strong effects in our attentional measure, kind of supporting Barlow's idea, but very little to nothing in terms of the emotional reactivity. So the conclusion of me at that time was, and Barlow was on my dissertation committee.
He was?
He was, as an external member.
He's a nice guy.
Oh, yeah. I was like, hi, I partially falsified your model. I'm really sorry. He was great about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So here you are. You're finishing up grad school. You got David Barlow on your dissertation committee. Now we start getting into some new territory for you, it seems to me. We just talked about this a little bit anecdotally over the years, but you go on the job market.
Yeah, and I'm thinking probably postdoc, because that's like 95% of what we do. And then I got an offer from a little school in Idaho.
Idaho?
Where
in Idaho?
Pocatello, Idaho.
I know Pocatello, Idaho.
How the hell do you know Pocatello,
Because I went to junior high and high school in Spokane, Washington.
Whoa.
Yeah,
that's
whoa,
weird.
Is right. Isn't that weird?
Nobody knows Pocatello.
It's Trump land. Man.
Yeah, I don't know how I got out alive. I was pretty sure the pitchforks were coming.
Pocatello, Idaho. So so what is the university there? It's
Idaho State.
Idaho State.
Yeah, and so I made the decision rather than
University of Idaho is in Moscow.
And Boise, I think, has one.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
So I just made the decision to rather, you can wait on the job market and see what happens with your postdoc offers, maybe. Or I had this offer in hand to run an independent laboratory already. So at age 29, I walked into Idaho State.
Pocatello. Well, you're from Beaumont. You can handle Pocatello.
Oh my God. Barely.
What happened?
It was an interesting place. I mean, it's a small department, and I was the only psychophysiologist there. So the biggest challenge...
there's currency there.
There's currency, but there's also a lot of suspicion, I think, in terms of like this new technique. What is this person doing? Are they going to take all our resources? And so I didn't... have supports there, like the engineering department I had at Indiana, where anything you
Oh,
needed,
yeah.
they would make downstairs.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
all of a
Get
sudden
used to
I'm
that,
like,
you're in trouble.
crap, I've got to learn how to build stuff, and I am not an electrician.
Oh my God.
And
I just can't tell you how much I relate to this.
so you know what we do, of course, we find John Curtin. He was a great psychophysiologist
At Wisconsin.
and flew him out with
Good job.
the trade of some skiing.
This is like 2000, what, 2002?
7, 8.
2007.
Yeah, so I had
Holy
internship
shit.
out in
So
Boston
when we
and
met in
bounced.
SPR, you were just a little person.
I was a wee
in grad
thing.
school.
But I was fresh off of that SPR, meeting still in my head. And so that was one of the first things we did, was looking at alpha asymmetry and sexual motivation.
So you had an EEG system.
I set up an EEG system.
Do you know what you remember what you got? What did you get?
Neuroscan. Yeah.
Did you get a 32
super.
channel or
of
a 64?
Course. And we started on a basic alpha asymmetry study to replicate basically some of y'all's work in the pleasure motivation domain. Partially did that.
How'd it go? Yeah.
My sense of that was we just threw fire at it. The effect sizes are so large with sexual stimuli that we got strong alpha suppression.
They went from being human to mammal. They just went all mammal on you.
Yeah, alpha is a direct indicator of mammal for anyone who didn't know. Who needs fMRI? And then I shortly after got a grant that first year from the Alcoholic Beverage Medical Research Foundation to study the effects of alcohol on sexual response. So that was a big part of what we were doing the next couple of years.
Another important question.
Yeah, whiskey dick. People are worried.
Whiskey dick.
Yeah.
Whiskey dick, is that a thing? You just said whiskey dick.
It's totally a thing.
It's a thing?
Well, not in my lab, it's not. But guys claim it is.
Okay, but did this grant help you? First of all, I can't believe we're talking about whiskey dick. Is there another term for it? Is that the term?
Impaired erectile functioning with
Impaired
alcohol
erectile.
consumption?
Okay, sure. Whiskey dick. Let's go back to whiskey dick. So did you study whiskey dick?
What we were interested in was we had some data from grad school when I was working with Peter Finn showing this really cool effect where we always kind of assume that, you drink alcohol, you get stupid, right?
Yeah.
So the more you drink, the more you'll do. And that was what was causing people to take sexual risks when they're drunk.
Yeah.
Turns out that's not really the case. It's all mediated through sexual arousal. And we had found that, and an independent laboratory in Seattle found that effect as well. So we were following up on that work, looking at when you give people alcohol, either at low or high doses or a placebo, what better predicts their shifts in risky decision-making if you present them with potential partners. Because, of course, we can't present them with real partners because we're conservative and stupid. And I should be able to present them with real partners. Anyway.
Wait, you mean like real partners, like right?
Why not?
To have sex in the laboratory?
Why not?
Yeah. I mean, Art Aaron had people come in and make out.
I'm jealous.
Yeah.
We can do these analogs better than what we were doing, but this is what we were doing at the time, was kind of accepted, vignette analogs for sexual risk behaviors. But then we try and generalize this case. So like one of the main reasons people say they take methamphetamines and cocaine to a lesser extent, but especially methamphetamines, is sexual enhancement. Number one reason. We know nothing about how meth actually affects sexual response. I've made several NIDA applications, as have colleagues, and we can't make any headway on it because it's just this weird, we shouldn't study that. It's, too much. We don't want to put stuff on people's penises.
Do you get that in reviews? Or do you get, because the thing is, especially when you're talking about NIH, there's the reviews of your peers on the one hand, and that's one determinant, and then there's the funding priority of the agency.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I guess it would seem less likely to me that your peers would be saying this is not something you can study, and more likely that the NIH would be saying this is not something we can support.
So the funny thing is, I don't know that my peers are all in those panels yet. I think we're mostly dealing theoretically, because these are anonymous, of course, to some extent. I mean, we know broadly
we know
the panel
who's on
makeup,
the panel, yeah,
but not who particularly started your review. We would often get feedback that we read to be cryptic as things like, we don't think you'll get enough volunteers for the study, which we thought was hysterical because we turned them away left and right. We get tons of volunteers.
Are you really?
We get this feedback repeatedly.
I mean, if I were asked to predict whether you could get people
right
to come into the laboratory and have sex, I would say, nobody's going to do that.
Right, it's a terrible thing to do. Nobody should.
No.
Of course.
No, not that it's a terrible thing to do. No. It's a fine thing to do. It's an important thing to do. We should do it. But will people do it? I mean, people won't do it.
My favorite example. So we did a brain stimulation study where we stimulated people's genitals with a vibrator. So you might say
you stimulated their.
We had it programmed in a computer.
But you weren't like.
I was not personally holding the vibrator with my hand. I was holding it with TTL pulses on the other side of the wall through my computer.
Okay.
But that study, we literally posted this ad on Craigslist in the casual encounter section for like 30 minutes and had 240 phone calls and emails to the point where our staff came in and said, "Can you please take the ad down because we can't use our phones?" Like people were clogging the lines. So, and this is on a random weekday on Craigslist in LA.
But then this raises the question, how generalizable are those people?
They were exactly who we wanted. We were looking for high-risk sexual people. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Got them.
Fair enough. Yeah. Good job.
Thanks.
But that's in LA.
That's in LA.
So how'd you get from Pocatello to
I
LA?
went a long path. From 3 years as an assistant professor there and was limited in a few different ways. I was the first person to ever submit an R01, that is the large grant mechanism through that department, which meant I just didn't have a lot of support there.
Yeah.
So I went to Mind Research Network, which is an independent research facility in Albuquerque, New Mexico on the campus of University of New Mexico.
Cool.
And I got there. 6 months later, they got bought by Loveless Respiratory Research Institute, Leary, and completely changed their direction and funding.
And they gave you the boot or what?
No, I had when I walked in a 2-year contract, and so I completed that contract.
Okay.
But I knew essentially that it was not likely to be extended because the agency priorities shifted soon after I got there. So I got back on the job market and, in this case, ended up at UCLA in the Gambling Studies program of all places.
The Gambling Studies
program. Think reward. I'm also a reward. So they are using.
That's right. Of course.
Yeah. They're doing secondary reinforcers.
And plus now you can start confirming the existence of sex addiction.
Yeah. That's pretty much what I came there for, was to prove that sex was addicting and bad and stinky.
I lost you at stinky, but I was there with everything else.
Up until that. Well, it's bad. You know this, right?
Right. So did you? You went to what was it called again? The Gambling
Studies program.
Yeah. And this is affiliated with what school?
I'm in Department of Psychiatry when I was at UCLA, and they were unique in that particular program was the only one, I believe, that had a state contract. So when you go and buy a gambling ticket or something and the state of California, some proportion of that money has to go back for the treatment of people who end up with gambling problems.
I see.
And this was part of what the state had funded to help ameliorate those difficulties people sometimes encounter.
Got it. So how'd it go? What did you started up your study? So now this seems like a different thing now. You've studied sort of qualities of sexual function, but now you're studying sex.
Right. So at this point, we used porn in a lot of studies. The porn addiction tests we had done actually were back in Idaho. We'd collected them there. And at this point, I'm getting really tired of having to make this logical leap. And what exactly was the porn doing? We were having...
What was the logical leap?
Things like, how do we think about what porn is actually doing? Are people responding to the stimulus they're seeing, or are they seeing the stimulus and using it as fantasy material, and that's creating individual differences? So some people are more effective than others at generating fantasy and therefore generating their own arousal.
Right. So, okay. So am I watching a kind of a prosthetic for my own fantasies? Or am I
watching the porn, or am I a good fantasizer? So these kinds of issues you just can't easily take apart because there's no dipstick for sexual fantasy. Because, they have 3 units of fantasy.
Right.
But there are dipsticks for vibrators.
Really? There are dipsticks for vibrators? I don't understand. What are you talking about?
When I was at Idaho, we did a study of common vibratory stimulation devices. We slapped an accelerometer on them.
You were studying different devices?
Yeah.
Because you were comparing the utility of the devices for research, or you just wanted to know about different devices?
It was
making consumer recommendations?
Long term, I knew I wanted to move towards that kind of a model and away from films. And
you mean so not showing porn, but just directly
actual sexual stimulation.
Genitalia.
I would love to go straight to partners, but I think it was too risky in the US to make that jump. So the in-between jump was to try to do genital stimulation through some other means. And we knew vibrators work on guys too. There was
They do?
Oh, hell yeah. There's a whole series of studies from the Netherlands showing this very well. How not?
Okay, I don't know. I don't understand the mechanics of it.
Yeah, so the guys in the Netherlands used to use little bullet vibrators, and they would wrap them around just under the tip of the penis, underneath, which is known to be a very sensitive spot, very commonly stimulated during masturbation by men's report. And they would turn these suckers on and leave them and see how long it took them to reach orgasm. And they would use this as a model for understanding what was called premature ejaculation at the time, now called rapid ejaculation. And
that's interesting.
So,
a little shift.
Right. We knew this was likely to work, even though, of course, when we test guys, they always make clear to us when we walk in, well, I don't normally do this, but for science, okay, whatever, buddy.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Put it on. So, we had slapped a piezoelectric accelerometer on these vibrators just to get a sense of what are people using exactly? Like, what is the displacement characteristic of a typical vibrator? And ones that are more commonly used to reach orgasm, how do those differ? Is it really in frequency or is it displacement? Because these are two different properties.
What do you mean displacement?
So displacement is how much the housing outside the device in this case is actually moving from a center point. And frequency is how fast it's doing that.
Right.
So how much is it really literally like beating back and forth versus just doing whatever it's doing really quickly?
Fast.
Yeah. And one paper before had suggested displacement, and we found some data suggesting similar, like it's probably more the displacement than the frequency. These are good things to know for when you circle back around and you want to develop now a device to stimulate someone in the laboratory.
Right, because you want to do it the best way possible.
Yeah, like when you're starting from scratch, essentially, what do you put on them first? What's the first thing in the door? And it's a tremendous problem. This is where bias is a huge issue because, as a sexual person, I admit it. I've had sex.
No, you haven't.
I know, right? So we have our biases because they're our own personal experiences of like, well, this works. This is how this thing works.
Yeah.
Well, maybe just for you. It might not be any other human.
And there might even be individual differences with, what kind of things.
Yeah. So we had to have some idea of like what was common, what's typical.
And did you settle on an answer?
We ended up using really a high displacement device.
High displacement.
Yep.
And frequency doesn't matter as much?
So you can, obviously they're somewhat correlated because if you increase the frequency, it can create.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Whiplash. Yeah. So we just basically had the sense from these early looks that we wanted a device that was pretty intense. We didn't want to start with some cute little bullet vibrator. We were just going to go all in, kind of get the strong stuff because we wanted to be sure we were able to stimulate people and potentially orgasm eventually.
And why? Exactly. Why were you making them orgasm?
The orgasm study started because we were looking at reward responsiveness and depression. And of course, many people have found that Greg Siegel, our colleague in Pittsburgh.
And good buddy.
Yes. Hi, Greg. had found, people with depression tend to experience pleasant stimuli, but they rapidly dampen those experiences. And this is associated with activity in the VMPFC. And this suggested or could be that if they had a sufficiently strong positive stimulus, maybe they wouldn't be able to dampen it. That is this a skill they could acquire, or is it something that was deficient in their ability to process the stimulus? So let's just give them something they can't stop. It's a really strong, undeniably positive reward, primary reward, and see if we saw differences in responsiveness. Now, to get there, we didn't start with depressed people, of course. You have to establish it in a normative sample.
Sure.
And this
and
is
the procedure and
like how the hell do you provoke this? Where do we set it up?
Can we get people into the laboratory? And
I never had a question about that. That's you. I have no questions about getting people in the lab.
Yeah. Okay. But so and can we just talk really quickly about what they actually do?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they
For
come
the
into
orgasm.
the laboratory. Mm-hmm. How does a person have an orgasm in your laboratory?
So
because I would feel discomfort.
So they don't obviously just walk in and slap down. No, they
What's
come
the
in.
protocol?
We have the typical informed consent. They fill out questionnaires online. They do cognitive tasks at a computer when they're sitting upright, fully clothed. So we have some interaction with them beforehand, and this all occurs in a private room. We use massage tables, but essentially gynecological exam tables is what we would have used. Also work just as well. And we get these folks set up. We're trying to measure their brain response during all of this. So we've got the additional complication of you're not just having an orgasm in the lab. We've also got you tied down to 6 other things.
Yeah.
We've got respiration on you. We've got galvanic skin response, electromyography, heart rate. We're pulling everything we can because these data are so unique. Oh, we're all in.
Yeah, that's good.
And for a variety of reasons. So after we get your poor self strapped down to this table, essentially, and different levels of strap down depending on kind of how the instruments fit you, what your preferences are. These people are typically disrobed, or if they have a dress, they might pull the dress up, and we get the vibrator in the vicinity of their genitals and leave the room.
How?
So we have this Hitachi magic wand mounted on a microphone stand. And
what's a Hitachi magic wand?
Oh my God.
What is that?
It is probably the most popular stimulation device used for sexual enhancement, and it's recommended. It's a vibrator, yeah, and it appears in Becoming Orgasmic, the classic text of treating anorgasmia. So it's been around a long, long time.
Okay. So that's attached to a microphone stand?
Taped to a microphone stand.
Just try to get
with bunting to dampen the vibration that is sheared off to the stand. Hey, how would you do this?
Hey, no.
Come on, man.
Look, I told you I was going to giggle.
This is hard science. So then the question is you've got this thing. Then what? How, for the guys, are we going to try and chase their penis around as they start to get hard with this thing? What's going to happen? And so we decided, seriously, it's going to flip around. It doesn't just stay in one place.
What's going to flip around?
The penis.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought you meant. But
so it's flaccid, and then it gets hard, and it flips upright. See, the penis works this way.
Now. But let's just back up. So let's just talk women
it's a lot of hand gestures.
I can't, there's too many flipping devices and body parts. So women are in there, you set.
Yes. So we have.
You set I'm so sorry I'm laughing so hard. This is not good.
It's great.
You set the vibrator.
With an attachment for the clitoral hood.
To the what?
For the clitoral hood.
For the clitoral, so there's an attachment for the Hitachi magic wand.
Yes.
That's designed for the clitoral hood.
That's where we have applied it.
Okay, and you hand it to them.
We wiggle it over to them so it's sitting beside their table.
Okay.
And we say we're going to leave the room, and we want you to get this in a position such that. We're going to turn it on so you can kind of sample what the intensity is like. And we also give them a dial beside them that we have
a rating dial?
Added, not a rating dial, but an intensity dial
so
they have
so
control.
They can set the,
Yeah, we did decide to give up experimental control over that piece because we were really concerned that we would potentially choose vibratory thresholds that were far too high and actually make some people in pain, which obviously we want to avoid.
Yeah.
We want them aroused, not annoyed.
Yeah.
And so
I agree.
We give them a brief trial period, and then we turn the device off, and on an intercom from the next room, we say, do you feel like you have it set, or would you like to try again? If they want to try again, we'll run the 10-second or...
And can you see them?
No.
Okay, so they're in totally private room.
Yep, they're totally private room by themselves at this point.
That's good.
And to help facilitate, we hope,
Yeah.
responses. And then the big question comes up, which is, well, then what? My colleague and I had many, many rounds of discussion about this because there is nothing published on how to do this.
How to tell them.
Well, we wanted to control the stimulation pattern.
Oh my God.
What should that be?
What are you talking about?
Yeah. So he and I have different personal preferences, which I won't get into. So
personal preferences about what?
About how we thought the pattern should be done. And so we had to acknowledge that we had no idea, because obviously he and I had completely different ideas. So it was
and different physiologies.
Different physiology.
So you're talking about how it should be applied to the genitals.
Yes.
To create orgasm.
Yes. We did not.
You guys were beta testing? You guys were testing this out?
For science, I decided it was worth the sacrifice.
Okay.
I always joke.
I had to ask.
Yeah.
I go through all of my own protocols.
Exactly. People. So this is the parallel. Of course, we test ourselves first.
Sure.
My favorite side story, if I may.
Yes, you may.
As we were testing all these various setups, we had trouble with the vibrator shorting out at periods because it's fairly high energy compared to the other devices we were running through this equipment. And
it would short out the circuit?
Yes. And so my esteemed colleague who made most of the advances on this hardware eventually thought, okay, we've got it figured out. So we set up my protocol. I was being run through this time. He was in a separate room, and get to the crucial, rather close moment, and the device shorts out. And he said, I have never seen you so angry.
That's rough. There's another study you should do.
I came out and I said,
what happens to
fix
people?
That. So we're not running shit until this gets fixed, permanently fixed.
You're going to inadvertently do a whole different kind of study.
Yep.
What happens when people get close and can't anymore?
Well, so we did a blue balls study, of course, inadvertently.
You did do that.
Inadvertently. This is
okay, because it was shorting out. Were there sparks?
So many sparks. But no, so this is the UCLA didn't want us to do this orgasm study, which is how we ended up doing it at Pittsburgh instead. Uh-huh. And
wait a minute. Whoa.
Yeah.
Wait, that I can't let that go by. UCLA wouldn't let you do the orgasm study?
We became what the ethics chair said was the second study in the history of UCLA to be rejected.
What in the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, so they didn't cite any safety or confidentiality concerns, nothing like that.
What was the threat to human
They never
dignity
cited
or
one.
safety?
They never cited one.
They didn't?
They told us we had to remove the orgasm component or they would reject the study, and we said that's
Are you
the purpose
me?
of the study. We won't remove it. And so they said, well, then your study's rejected. I escalated it as high as I could go as a little junior faculty member. I threw a fit.
How long are you here at that point?
Exactly. So I have a limited contract, and I am in my first year trying to get pilot data for an NIH grant.
And stop it.
Suddenly,
and let me also say we started talking about all the methodological details of creating orgasm in the laboratory because you were applying. This is one of the points that you're making right at the very beginning of our conversation. You're applying it to the study of reward responding
to address depression.
Yes. And God damn it, as a broad community of clinical psychologists, we turn ourselves into pretzels trying to find stimuli that are sufficient for the laboratory to study emotional responding.
Oh, honey, I got you.
And we come up with bullshit all the time. We're always lamenting in conference conversations about how, our stimuli is not strong enough. This is a perfect idea.
We could kill it, potentially.
You could kill it. And
we're allowed to use vibrators on the genitals, but not to bring them to orgasm. I'm not kidding. The crickets.
Well, I'm sort of.
This is how we felt too when it got rejected.
Flabbergasted.
We were both just like, well, shit.
So you took it up. You took it up higher levels. How did? This is appalling. I mean, can I say that? I don't want to say that. You don't have to say anything bad about UCLA, but I'm appalled, and I can say that I find it appalling because I can imagine it happening in a lot of places because of this absurd, this infantilizing fear of sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, it's in me. The whole way through this whole conversation, I'm giggling like a junior high school kid, like Beavis and Butthead, because it creates this sort of nervous anxiety. But what you're talking about makes perfect scientific sense.
Thank you, God damn it.
You're welcome, God damn it. Okay, so we got that part of the story. It just went flashing by, and I didn't want to let it go.
I know. I hate to ruminate on that because it was so sad at the time and just startling. I'd never, as many roadblocks as we have with sex, I'd never hit one that hard. Just an absolute no. So I can officially say, I used to make fun of us because I'd say, oh, we gripe all the time that we can't study this or we can't study that. So we just never asked. If we asked, we're just being chicken shits about it. Let's be real and put in the protocol. So I did. And I was like, shit, they were right. We can't do that here. We're not allowed.
Well, got an answer.
Yeah.
So you wound up doing that study at Pittsburgh?
Yeah, Pittsburgh had no problem with that.
Good show, Pittsburgh.
God bless
I'm proud of you.
Right?
I'm proud of you, Pittsburgh.
So progressive. I love it.
Yeah, well, it's funny with a topic like sexuality. One of the jokes you can make is it's science, ha 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 ha. Right? We're making people orgasm for science, ha ha. But in actual fact, it's fucking science. That's what it is.
It is also fucking science and fucking science. You walked
Thank you.
Right in.
Yeah, I was hoping for that one.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So how'd it go at Pittsburgh?
It was fascinating, frustrating. Things happened that we had no idea were going to happen and have launched us in totally different directions than we ultimately anticipated. So we were surprised the pattern of stimulation we ended up picking worked for pretty much everyone who walked in the door. It's a relatively small sample, but men and women.
Huh.
Very pleased about that and shocked.
So reliable.
Yeah, we
results.
feel like we've got a pretty good stimulation pattern that seems to work for most
hard
people.
Hard to come by in
Indeed.
Psychophysiology.
Oh my God, hard to come by. They just can't. I tried to let it go, and I just couldn't.
No, I couldn't resist. I've got others. I have others. I was making a list last night.
Oh my God.
I've got some left.
That's what he said. So, science. And so what were we? Oh, so some of the crazy stuff that happened, we found there's this funny kind of pattern, like when people are initially getting sexually aroused, so early stage, like they're watching porn or they're just, the vibrator's about to come on kind of thing. You get two patterns. So we get strong alpha suppression, and then
Is it mostly frontal cortex?
Yes, it seems to be especially frontal, but in general, these are large effects.
These are large effects.
Yeah.
It's the fire hose of
we
affective
kill it.
stimuli.
Yeah. And so we've got that starting off, and then the galvanic skin response, as you might expect, is going up.
Yep.
And then we have this funny thing happen. We say, okay, thank you very much, subject. You've been a great subject. We're now going to transition to the part where we'd like you to try and have an orgasm if you can. No pressure, blah, blah, blah. And then alpha floats up and galvanic skin response drops.
Wow.
Throughout the cognitive shift to when we instruct them to change what they're trying to do, up for the however long it takes, several minutes. So this is not like a blip just before. It appears to be a really long period before they have an orgasm that we think is the first time we're aware of. Someone has seen data of letting go, of what that means to shift into a state of mind where you can experience an orgasm.
It becomes, in a way, effortless. Because, when I think about the galvanic skin response for those listening, it's more or less how much you're sweating on your in your hands.
Supposedly sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, sympathetic nervous system. And it's thought to be a measure, thought to index sort of general physiological arousal and effort.
Yeah, so you would think with orgasm, it goes up, up,
just keep going
orgasm,
up until
blammo, thank you very much.
Blammo, right. Yeah. And then you would see it return.
Yeah. Not so much, it turns out. In fact, the opposite.
Wow.
Shit, we didn't know that. Now what?
Well, that could cause a whole rethinking about the sexual response cycle.
It's funny because in some ways, I think sex therapists talk about this already. They talk about getting in a brain state where you're not thinking about your grocery list and
Right.
you're,
And not thinking about your performance is the classic idea. is
yeah,
that you're
or
thinking
how
about
fat your thighs look,
Right,
or
right.
whatever distracting thing it
Yeah.
is, but just having the experience,
you're
being in
having
the
sex
moment.
with a person or with yourself,
Yeah.
as the case may be.
And we have some people studying mindfulness to help intervene with low drive. So, okay, well,
that's
that makes
interesting.
sense if you're like catching trying to stay with it, so
Yeah.
to speak. But we didn't have a way of talking about this because there had been, like Cindy Meston's lab, University of Texas, Austin, had this idea of exactly that it's this increase. They thought they documented that with having people ride a bicycle before they would watch a porno,
Right.
and it would facilitate their response.
Right.
So we thought this was great evidence that this was all part of this system that just had to go up and up and up to orgasm. And it turns out, oh shit, maybe we should have measured that. That appears not to be the case. This may be important for experiencing high pleasure.
Wow. So that's interesting. You learned something about orgasm per se.
Well, so there was that, but then we start asking around to other psychophysiologists, have you looked at high levels of arousal, like at your highest in terms of galvanic skin response? And we weren't the only ones, but no one else published it because they thought it was like an artifactual problem, like it wasn't real. So we have at least a couple of other instances of high emotional arousal, not sexual, where people think they've seen this already. So I think it could inform kind of emotion processing more broadly. That is, how do you sustain pleasant affect, positive affect over time?
Right. And was this then implicated in your depression findings?
We don't have depression findings yet. So
Oh, really? Okay, so we're still
haven't.
waiting to hear about that.
We are just working on putting out this paper has been invited for brain research in March. So that'll be kind of first step. And now we're working on a project of orgasmic meditation, which is partner genital stimulation. So, of course.
But wait, before we get to there, so I want to make sure that listeners know about your business. It's a foundation. It's a corporation.
LLC.
It's an LLC.
Yep.
So it's like a for-profit company.
A for-profit that's entirely funded by nonprofit grants. So
is that because it was easy? Because it's easier to set up an LLC.
It's easier to set up. California has a lot of structural requirements for doing a nonprofit with all the tax benefits that come with that. So it was easier.
And you set up this company for what purpose?
To take in the 2 grants that were refused by the school to study orgasmic meditation.
Okay. So we're back to what happened at UCLA.
I'm going to be quiet.
So you had this contract. It was just for a year.
2 years. They ended up being just shy of 3.
You're still doing the depression study at Pittsburgh. So you've got that off the ground, and that's going with your pal, Greg Siegel.
Yeah, we're doing brain stimulation stuff here at UCLA with Marco
Iacoboni, the famous.
Indeed.
And why do you leave UCLA?
So normally, for those that don't know, if you're on a soft money contract like I was, you are eventually responsible for covering your own salary with grants.
Right, with grant money.
And
but you had grants.
Yes, we got grants.
And what grant? You got some sizable, decent grants. Right?
Yeah, enough to cover my salary and at the level it was at, all of that good stuff. So I kind of expected like normal that, okay, it'll just be extended because
Here
that's
I am
pro forma.
doing my job at UCLA.
And requested the account number a few times to deposit the check, and they just weren't giving it to us. It was very weird. And so eventually I asked the funder, I said, would you mind sending me the check, and I'll see if we just walk in with it. Well, they tell us, oh, okay, here's where you put it. And that's when we got the official notice that they would not be accepting our grant funds, which essentially is saying bye-bye. So
had you spit on the director, or had you set fire to something?
I think it has... It's difficult to say because they didn't make any attribution in the refusal of the funds. But this had come after a period of 2 things. One was the rejection of the orgasm study, which was unusual and certainly a problem.
Okay.
And the other was because of the work I was doing studying pornography addiction, they were getting almost weekly complaint letters asking me to be fired, claiming I had falsified data and like.
Did you falsify data?
I did not falsify data. Thank you for asking.
I knew that. Wait, who was claiming claiming you falsified data?
There's anti-porn organizations, so people that want, for example, porn to be taken off the internet, or they think porn's destroying marriages.
But what does that have to do with the work that you're doing?
We had found evidence in the largest neuroscience study still to date that porn did not look like other substance or behavioral addictions. It was different in a very distinct way, so that you really shouldn't be calling it an addiction probably. Yeah, that's clearly a problem for some people, but it doesn't look like an addiction.
So the dominant sort of folk theory was that porn is addicting in the same kind of fashion that cocaine,
cigarettes,
right.
Yeah.
And you found evidence that was not necessarily a strong.
Yeah, our team
strong evidence for that.
Had a couple of publications in this area, and then some behavioral publications, and this angered them to no end because they had started calling it an addiction before there'd been a single experimental study.
Oh, for God's sake.
So
are they still after you?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day. So,
shit.
So it was a kind of transitioning to the company was a combination of those things, I think. Mm-hmm. That is, the school was having to deal a lot with these complaints that, they
should have come to bat for you.
They did, actually. Like, they had a lot of attorney time because as a public university, they have to respond to complaints like that.
Right.
And so they would have to investigate every single thing these yahoos sent in. They'd come to me, did you do this? No. Thank you.
Did you have to get formal investigations about data falsification and all of those?
No, they actually never did that because they didn't actually present anything to
evidence.
Suggest.
Yeah, you have to.
They just thought it had definitely been falsified.
Oh,
it had to have been falsified.
Sake, forget it.
And the school was like, no, not unless you have real reason to think so.
So now you were able to move the grants over to the business. What's the business called?
Liberos. Yeah, this is Mark Cohen's baby. Actually, we were trying to come up with a name. So Liber and Eros, freedom to desire.
I love it. Freedom to desire.
You don't have to desire if you don't want to, but if you do.
But if you do, and you've moved the grants over to there. The grants are for studying orgasmic meditation, and it's ongoing.
We are collecting data as we speak.
So can I just make an observation? First of all, I want to say I really admire what you're doing because you've had so many opportunities, let's say, to just say, fuck it, I'm not going to do this anymore because it's really hard. You're up against a culture, and God, you've been up against this since your childhood in Beaumont that just doesn't want it. It reminds me a little bit of what Ellen Burchide went through in the late 70s when Senator Proxmire established the Golden Fleece Award because she wanted to study love. And at that time, that was a horrible taboo. You couldn't study love. Love is a great mystery. There's no biology of love. And he said famously that even if there was, he wouldn't want to know about it. And I think that psychology's come through. Sort of the psychodynamic, behaviorism, the cognitive revolution, but then studying emotions was all sort of like, that's not real science. And now it's a very firm part of the science, it's sort of the body of science that we have. Then the study of relationships at all. And that all focused on romance.
So mushy. It's very mushy.
Yeah. And now it's much more established, and we even have neuroscience every now and then. And sex is
the
still
last frontier.
Yeah, kind of. Even though you've had Masters and Johnson, and they did really important work, and you had Kinsey, and obviously you've had there are other researchers in the world doing sex research. But what you're really illustrating is how far we have left to go.
But this is part of the attraction. I mean, seriously, when we saw that pattern with the orgasm, mind
You're
blown.
You're making a real discovery.
You just discovered something about basic physiology. Whoa.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Cool. Like, what other fields is that open? It's going to be something brand new. You didn't know the body worked that way.
Well, I tell you, it's really great stuff, and I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with me about this great work. We're going to do this again because I have so much more to talk with you about.
Oh, good. Another pervert. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm in.
All right. Thank you so much. Another pervert. Okay, that's it. Very many thanks to Nicole Prause for her candor and wit and scientific rigor, and for putting up with me. I just couldn't stop laughing, and I do apologize for that. But But hey, you know what? The important thing is, as uncomfortable as things can get when discussing how to make people orgasm, or, what happens to the sexual response when you drink, or really anything, whatever, having to do with pornography, say, the important thing is we keep talking, right? We keep talking about it, just let it be uncomfortable until it isn't anymore. Because if we resolve to stop avoiding our discomfort, we may well decide to devote more resources to this vital research. And by doing that, might even learn some more stuff about the psychology and physiology of sex. And maybe that stuff will be stuff we can leverage to increase our health and well-being. You never know. I have a feeling that would be the case. Anyway, thanks again, Nikki, for the conversation and for all the work you are doing. Folks, the music on Circle of Willis is written by Tom Stauffer and Gene Ruley and performed by their band, The New Drakes. For information about how to purchase their music, check the About page at circleofwillispodcast.com. Don't forget that Circle of Willis is brought to you by VQR and the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia, and that Circle of Willis is a member of the TEEJ FM network. You can find out more about that at teej.fm. If you like this podcast, how about giving us a little review at iTunes and letting us know how we're doing? It's super easy and we like it. Or send us an email by going to circleofwillispodcast.com and clicking on the Contact tab. In any case, I'll see you at episode 12, where I talk with Jay Van Bavel, Associate Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at New York University. Jay and I cover a lot of ground, from the use of social media to communicate about politics and science, to the psychology of group identity, and even to some of his adventures as a kid who grew up in pretty rural northern Alberta. That's in Canada, folks. Okay? Until then, bye-bye.